This video is sponsored by NVIDIA. In here is one of the fastest gaming PCs that you can build right now. With a Ryzen 7800X3D powered by AI technology using the NVIDIA GeForce RTX 4090 GPU, all in a case that is under 15 liters. Now, this isn't the absolute smallest that you can go. I did a build a few weeks ago in the Form T1, which is under 10 liters, but this case has much larger graphic card support and an absolute ton of config options in a super compact form factor. So you might recognize the look of this case from the previous very popular Ncase M1, which was discontinued a few years ago. This is the successor. It's the Ncase M1EVO, and while it has a larger overall volume compared to the classic, it's still going to take up very little space on your desk while housing an absolute powerhouse 4090 GPU. All the pieces feel incredibly high quality. They're made of CNC grade aluminum and anodized steel. So if you built in the Form T1, for example, then it should all feel really familiar to you. All the pieces are perfectly machined and they fit together like a puzzle, which is super satisfying to put together. I really like the look of this case. It's got a very clean overall design with no visible branding anywhere on the front or the sides, just a removable plate that houses the M1EVO name. Now on the bottom front is where you'll find the power button and case IO. There are a handful of different front panel designs that all look really nice in my opinion. I was wanting to go for a matte black look, so I decided to go with the angled black option, but I would also be really interested in checking out the silver mock kit version if they're ever restocked. So the case comes flat packed, and to be honest, it's a pretty involved setup process here. I was thinking about making another video guide for building in this case, so let me know in the comments if that is something that you would be interested in. Now with this setup process comes quite a few different configurations to choose from. You could go with a kind of standard layout that puts everything where you would expect it, you know, with the motherboard right side up and the GPU at the bottom. And if you want to, you can actually fit up to a micro ATX motherboard. But because I'll be using a Founders Edition 4090 with the blow-through style cooler, I am gonna go with the flipped configuration. Now, everything might seem a bit strange having the motherboard upside down with the graphics card at the top, but when it comes to noise levels and thermal performance, giving the GPU this much fresh air really can make a noticeable difference. There are more options here as well. If you grab a vertical GPU kit with the glass side panel, then you can show off an even larger third-party card like an Asus Strix 4090 or a larger 4070 Ti like I have here. And so this case can fit absolutely massive GPUs. Both positions can fit a 4-slot graphic card up to 359 millimeters in length, but you get about 20 millimeters more in height clearance with the vertical setup. Now my Founders 4090 fit in here with no issue and even has some extra space to spare at the front. The only thing to note is that because of the width, you will need to pick up a 180-degree adapter like the one I have here from Corsair in order to get the side panel to close. So you're not going to be able to use the default adapter that comes in the box. Now, because this build is going to be completely over the top, we're going to pair the 4090, which is the fastest GPU on the market, with the fastest gaming CPU on the market, and that's the 7800X3D. Now, a huge benefit to this pairing is how incredibly power efficient the 7800X3D is. So with all of this performance in a small case, I want to save as much power and heat load as possible to bring the overall noise levels and thermals down. Now there's a ton of CPU cooling options available in this new M1. There's 3 main positions for the radiators, being at the top, bottom, and side. With an additional fan kit, you can fit 3 radiators at once, which is actually kind of wild to think about. But what I'm most interested in today is the air cooling performance. See, even with a high performance machine like we're building today, you really don't need much more than a decent sized air cooler to properly cool that CPU. And so I'm gonna be trying out the new Noctua NH-D9L Chromax Black. This cooler sits about 110 millimeters tall and it fits with no problems at all because we have actually up to 135 millimeters in clearance. So there is still quite a bit of room to spare. The 7800X3D is a very efficient chip, and so I'm seeing the CPU temps leveling out at around the mid 60s under a heavy gaming workload. And the 4090 is in the low 60s playing Cyberpunk 2077 at an ultra wide resolution with ray tracing ultra preset. Now this case does also support an ATX power supply, but I decided instead to go with an SFX power supply and use the SF750. Now I decided to go that way because I liked the idea of not blocking the 4090's exhaust fan, and that extra space does make cable management just a little bit easier. And so the final build here is a Ryzen 7 7800X3D plugged into an Asus X670EI with 32 gigs of DDR5 6000 memory, 2 terabytes of storage, a Noctua D9L, the Corsair 750, and of course, that monster 4090. So I've actually installed a couple of fans as well at the front. There was just enough room above the CPU cooler to add a slim fan, and then of course, plenty of room to add a standard width 120 on the other side. Now I set both of these to exhaust. I've done some testing in the past with a similar setup in the Meshroom D, and I got really good results with this configuration. So I wanted to try it again here. There might be a bit of negative pressure, but we will be able to quickly remove all that heat from the 4090 and the CPU. So I am seeing some pretty good results in this case as well. They're also not really introducing too much extra noise. I'm seeing the full system noise sitting around 43 decibels during gameplay. And so with a build like this, using a 4090 and all of NVIDIA's AI tech, you can basically handle anything. So switching over to the performance side of things, we have Cyberpunk 2077. Now running at a native 4K resolution without any of NVIDIA's AI technology, and we're getting a pretty respectable 55 frames per second at ultra settings with Ray Tracing Ultra. So turning on ray tracing does bring the overall image quality to another level, but it is way more demanding on the GPU. And so that's where NVIDIA's DLSS comes in. Turning on DLSS and frame generation, you get a massive increase to over 150 frames per second. So if you're using a high refresh rate monitor, you're gonna have a good time here. Now, DLSS has come a long way. Before with 1.0 and 2.0, it was just a super sampling tech that basically took a low res image and then it upscaled it to a newer, higher resolution so that you could play games at that higher resolution without it being as taxing on your GPU. Now, it does still do that, but now that's just one component of a whole suite of tools that make an overall better gaming experience. So now we're at DLSS 3.5, which first, you do still have that super sampling, but it's improved substantially from the previous versions to the point where you really can't even tell during gameplay that the image is getting upscaled at all. It looks as good as native, which is incredibly impressive. There's also ray reconstruction, which adds a lot of clarity and an all-around better, more efficient ray tracing. Now, in addition, we also have NVIDIA Reflex, which reduces latency. And so you really feel the benefits of this when playing competitive first shooters or battle royale games. So you get the fastest response times possible by reducing the overall system latency. And you'll see settings for this in games like Apex Legends or Fortnite to get those advantages. But my favorite new feature right now is frame generation. So if you've watched my other build videos, you've probably heard me talk about this before. And so what this does is it takes AI generated frames and it inserts them between natively rendered frames. This can go as far as doubling the frame rate in some games, and it's incredibly effective at making gameplay much smoother. At this point in time, it's not something that you would necessarily want to use for competitive games. And to be honest, I don't think I've even seen it offered in any multiplayer competitive games because it can add a small bit of latency. But honestly, that extra latency in a story-driven single-player game is imperceivable. But the difference in visual clarity and smoothness is massive. Now, the exception here is that in order to have a good experience, you also need to have a decent base frame rate. So anything over around 30 frames per second is typically gonna get you some good results. But if it's too much below that, you're probably not gonna have as good of a time. It's just not gonna work as well. And so with that said, these tools are not gonna solve everything. You do still need to have a modern GPU that will support these new features, and you need to have that good base frame rate. But with these AI tools, you're gonna get a way better experience than you would without them. Now, what I think makes these new GPUs and the AI tech exciting specifically for the ITX market is that it's making these new GPUs far more efficient and capable than ever before. See, we've seen these graphics cards get larger and larger, and they require so much more power in order to increase the GPU capabilities. In the ITX space, you're seeing cases come out now to support these larger GPUs like this M1EVO, but if you want to get something much smaller, like under that 7 or 5 liter mark, your GPU options do become a lot more limited. And that's an area where the efficiencies and AI tech are making a huge difference. And so while we're still seeing those increases in size and power draw on the high end, like the 4080 and 4090, we're also seeing some real efficiencies on the low end cards that fit in much smaller builds, which I think is equally exciting as what we're seeing on the high end. For instance, now we have a low profile 4060 that was released from Gigabyte this year, where you can see some really impressive performance in an ITX PC around 5 liters or even smaller. I did one in a 3.9 liter build last month with the Zotac single fan 4060. One of the best games to showcase all of this is with Cyberpunk 2077, and on a high-end system like what we have here with the 4090, it looks absolutely incredible, which really is not surprising. But even with a 4060 in a tiny 3.9 liter case, you can get over 100 frames per second at 1080p using DLSS and frame generation. The fact that you can play one of the most demanding games with this image quality and frame rate in such a small machine is insane. And that's all because of NVIDIA's AI gaming tech. This of course goes well beyond Cyberpunk. DLSS has had a ton of support and updates with almost 500 games and apps that now support DLSS, along with a ton of new features. Then the AI tech branches outside of games themselves. If you're into game streaming on something like Twitch or YouTube, NVIDIA Broadcast can enhance your voice by cutting out background noise and then improve your video by cutting out the background from the image and help you keep eye contact with the camera using their eye contact feature. Then if you're a creator, there's a suite of AI accelerated tools for over 100 creative apps like Blender, DaVinci Resolve, OBS Studio, and the Adobe Creative Suite. I personally use things like generative fill and Photoshop to fix images all the time. I mean, this RTX GPU tech can be used just for everyday benefits as well. With RTX Super Resolution for video, you can upscale the resolution when streaming Netflix and YouTube videos. And all of this runs locally on the GPU itself. So overall, this is a seriously impressive build. The 4090 is an absolute monster GPU. And then combining that with the 7800X3D, you're getting one of the fastest gaming PCs available today. Now, after spending a few days and experimenting with the build, I do have some thoughts on the case. Some things that you might want to keep in mind if you go for a similar build that I'm hoping Endcase will update in the future. So first, the flipped config like I have here doesn't actually give you a spot to mount a fan bracket at the top. That kind of feels like a little bit of a missed opportunity for some extra airflow. It's been shown that adding a couple of slim fans at the top can decrease the temps in like the Dan C4. I think this could be easily fixed though with an adapter that they could include in the future. The only other option that I see is using the bottom panel as the top panel instead and then using the mounting points on it. But I really don't think that'd be very aesthetically pleasing, and aesthetics, I think, are kind of a big reason why you would go for a case like this. Also, despite the fact that they said that they were updating the case to work with the Corsair GPU bridge, it does still push up against the panel and can cause it to bow out. I really think that at this point, they should have made the case just a few millimeters wider. That would solve the issue for the GPU power connector, and as a bonus, that could have given enough clearance to fit a larger CPU cooler like the D12L. You know, this is still a 15-liter case, and that would have made it a good alternative for anyone who wanted the Dan C4, but didn't get a hold of it before they went out of production. I do think in my next build, I will probably go for a top-mounted radiator with the vertical GPU mount. I think that actually might be the play here. But either way, the way I have it configured now with the air cooling is still getting some really great temperatures, and the 4090 is obviously still a monster and able to fully perform here. And the fact that we can pack this much performance into such a compact machine still really impresses me. So over the next several weeks, NVIDIA is going to be giving away some awesome prizes across their channel, so make sure to keep an eye out on their latest post to see how you can enter to win some new tech. But anyway, let me know what you guys think about the build in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.